And I remember what Paula Reed told me and Lincoln Lamb told me. He said, "Do you remember your instructions were always not to keep any copies, to send everything back?" And they had to, that's why they couldn't find anything at Lincoln. They said, "Your orders were to give everything back." And those were our instructions. What this would cause, all weapons would be obsolete.
Did you ever have a guess about where they were from?
Well, we tried to, but we never came up with any definite where they were from.
If it's time machine and everything else, could be us. That's a worse possibility.
Did you ever feel like you had to brief somebody else in the political center of potential danger, or did you just carefully try to prepare?
No, I would never agree. Oh, I did talk about this very early with John McCormick, because we were pretty close friends. After Kennedy died, he was #2.
I don't think Jacques has heard the story about the Russian base. What happened to that Russian base, and I'm curious about how the information came to you.
CIA and the intercepts. You know, we had a system that was watching, could localize all atomic detonations. And that was part of it. And the other was the CIA report. Somewhere in my papers I have a copy of the CIA report. And that happened. And there was 200 scientists killed. So they were lying to you. There were two ways. The CIA got the report and the atomic monitoring that we had worldwide.
And the report contained an explanation about what caused the explosion.
But UFO activity in the area.
So in the file that you had, there was a report on an autopsy?
Yeah. See, the Walter Reed Laboratory was ours. We financed it. It belonged to R&D. It was our laboratory. It wasn't Walter Reed. We financed it. Yeah, it's still there. We still live together. I don't know.
Were there photos with this report?
No. Oh, I had one photo, but it was pretty messed up. I couldn't tell much from it.
Of an alien body?
It was pretty messed up.
Do they preserve the certain things they must have preserved our issues?
I really don't know. I'm just thinking 2 months and maybe the Air Force did. I don't think the Army ever did it. I never saw a report on any accusation of it. Maybe they did, but I never saw any.
Okay, well, what was reported in the autopsy?
Well, the thing that interested me was the lip gland part and digestive system, which didn't exist. And the brain was no interest in this movie operating. When they opened up the brain, they showed the lobe, if you go close enough. And sex organs were all, they called it an atrophy.
No atrophy?
Like use. Atrophy. That's what we've done. A-N-T-H-R-O-P-I-T. Yeah. They were like abuse. Sex organs were almost non-existent. So these are the things that really interested me. That's where I saw that glove with the suction cups on.
That was well.
Yeah, that was no fingers. They only had 4 fingers. And now that was unusual. I don't know. No thumb. The lady used to that. But they disappeared. Naturally, nothing could be said because these things didn't exist as far as the government is concerned. There was no talk about what happened. You couldn't say that UFO was gone or the body was gone because National Quality was they didn't exist. How do you talk? How does something be burned up in an explosion of fire that didn't exist? Same way we played the game. We played the same game. R&D, we played a game. Nobody can investigate because we investigate something that doesn't exist. To put out an order to cover all this. What the hell are they going to put out an order to cover? They don't know what the hell to cover. I don't think there was any cover-up. I couldn't trace one. I never knew one. I had all the clearances. I was in the spook business. operation, we don't want to wait a good reason not to put it out. Not only that, did we put it out, but we didn't have any PR function. We wanted to put it out. It wasn't our job to put things like this out. And we didn't want to do it anyway. We didn't cover it up. We wanted to give it to industry and American people. But it couldn't be done with the clown opinion of the way things were. With the political situation and all these bunkers and all this stuff. This UFO problem has never been handled right. Never had. There hasn't been a real intelligent study of UFOs that bring in all the factors. If you would tell me right now, set up a plan to cover up the UFO thing, what the hell is that right? How would I approach it? And what would I say to cover up? It was been said, don't answer any questions because you don't have the answers. So what are they going to cover? Okay, well, there never has been a study made up.
For our going forward then, it would actually be nice to know there isn't some dedicated group of people who do not want to get information out. So if that's the case, then it ought to be possible for us to come up with a plan to help get information out, or channel information out, or channel out.
Let's say that there's a group like this in here in my day, and you came up to us. You wouldn't have gotten anything. We were talking to protect ourselves, not because of you or because of him or because of him. But the thing was, we don't even talk about it. We go ahead and do our job because we got to cover our tracks if we want to operate 100%. So we can't let anybody know or talk about this thing.
So that was a second recording you did with Colonel Corso. Oh man, I'm glad that you picked up that camera, even if it's shitty footage. You know, that's so cool to get that testimony documented. Yeah, you know, again, I think some of the claims seem to stretch the bounds of reality. You know, they went pretty far. It's hard to, it would be hard under the best of circumstances to prove beyond reasonable doubt that fiber optics came from, inspired by these strange materials that were picked up in the desert outside Roswell, New Mexico. But that's what he says. Did Colonel Corso have to get permission in any way to talk about the things that he did in his book? He just went for it. He did went for it, yeah. You know, I think he had, as I recall, he had a relationship with Strom Thurmond, who had served in the U.S. Senate longer than anybody, I think. And in fact, Strom Thurmond originally wrote the foreword to his book. Now, after Strom Thurmond's staff realized, holy cow, this is a UFO book, they wanted to withdraw, but you know, the deed had been done already. The following year is when the Roswell book came out, the day after Roswell. It's on the 50th anniversary. It was a huge bestseller. And as a part of that, Corso did other interviews with other media. And he came back to Las Vegas and met with me, and we did another interview for KLAS TV. It's all over the internet now, but maybe we can play a little chunk of it.
Because I already told you, I was all interested in some UFOs. I was all interested in what was in those UFOs.
Anyone familiar with UFO lore will recognize at least some of what Phil Corso says. Reports of crashed saucers, recovered alien bodies, a government cover-up. But in 50 years of UFO controversy, no one of his rank or stature has ever publicly proclaimed this level of inside knowledge. Corso was an intelligence officer inside the Eisenhower White House, assigned to the National Security Council. He also served as Inspector General of the 7th Army and commanded the 1st Nuclear Battalion in Germany. His credentials are impeccable, his record spotless. But did he really handle wreckage from a flying saucer?
They came from a flying saucer.
How do you know that?
Because they were marked in a pile that's coming from New Mexico.
Roswell.
Yeah, Roswell.
Roswell, of course, is the most famous alleged UFO crash site in history, a story which the Air Force has tried to bury once and for all. Corso says that Army Research and Development not only had pieces of wreckage in its possession, but also reports and photos from an autopsy of an alien cadaver.
I had the report. See, the Walter Reed, the laboratory Walter Reed, was our laboratory. We financed it. He was part of the guidance system, or it, whatever it is, because it has no sex or anything. It was part of the guidance system. That's why we failed in propulsion.
Corso says the Army kept the material and bodies secret because of potential enemies within the U.S. government, interests which might take over the program and destroy the reputations of those involved. He thinks the secrets are still being kept, but doesn't know by whom. Twice in the past few years, Corso has testified before Congress concerning secret activities within the Eisenhower White House. He's been thoroughly checked out and his information confirmed. But his most sensational allegation is one which American industry isn't going to like at all. Corso says the Army spoon-fed recovered alien technology to American industry, resulting in some of our greatest technological advances.
The number one was the integrated circuit. Number two in the importance was lasers, because I have some laser instruments also. Then fiber optics.
Such sensational claims have invited harsh criticism, but Corso doesn't mind. He names others who knew what he knows, and it's an exclusive club, he says.
General Marshall, General Trudeau, General MacArthur, Von Braun, Over, Wilbur, Smith, something like that. I thought, oh, my good company. That's the company I'd rather be in. Those two.
So we're kind of living in a different world now where we have to look back at what people told us before. It dawns on me that here's a guy saying reverse engineering of UFOs was real. What happened in Roswell was real. He's a high-ranking military guy. He just goes for it and puts this out. You wonder if he would seed his own story with things that are a little bit unbelievable as a way to kind of take the heat off of him, like the fact that he said he met a live alien on his own. Or, I mean, who am I to judge? Maybe the guy is a stand-up individual who's telling the truth. I don't know, man.
Remember, he drew me a picture at that first meeting in Florida. In that RV, he drew me a picture of the alien that he said he met. And I think I still got that image somewhere. And, parts of what he said really were tough to swallow. And it was much different from the version he had first given to me. He gave me an outline of the story he wanted to tell, that he had written himself. When we were talking about doing a book together. And it was a much more modest telling of the story than the one that eventually came out. That was one of the criticisms of Corso that came out after the book, is that he seems to place himself at the center of every major event of the 20th century. It's a lot of key people. Well, the fact is he was with many of the biggest events of the 20th century, right there in the thick of things with some of the main people who shaped that century.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you wonder if the kind of fish gets bigger with each telling of the story with some of this stuff. But is the core of it true? And again, I just keep going back to the physical hardware. If we have been told directly from people that as they're working on this technology, about every 10 years, they wheel it back out and they try to see if our material science is caught up to replicate any of it. So it makes sense to me that he would be one of these original whistleblowers. And this is a guy we know was a whistleblower when it came to prisoners of war. He's got a great military career. I mean, he just doesn't seem like a liar, right?
I don't think so. That wasn't my impression. I think that the story did get a lot bigger in the retelling of it 5 years after I first met him. But the core of it is really interesting. He was at the places that he would have needed to be to see the stuff that he claims to have seen. The story about reverse engineering of technology, we know that there's a lack of progress on the propulsion technology. We haven't been able to reproduce anti-gravity mechanisms through using Earth technology or Earth materials. But that doesn't mean we haven't made breakthroughs on other stuff that may have come from the Roswell records or other crashes.
Yeah, even like, the idea of artificial intelligence, there are some people that believe that as we have kind of increased our technical knowledge, that we've gained a lot of information from these reverse engineers. But my question is more, if we had a program that specifically deals with propulsion and the power source like Lazar talked about, Project Galileo, Lazar also said that there are two other programs that he heard about. Project Sidekick, which was a weaponization program, a laser weaponization program. And then he talked about Project, Looking Glass. And Looking Glass was about the lensing of gravity, space-time differentials, that kind of thing. And I think power propulsion was Project Galileo, if I remember. So that's what Bob said. You have to imagine, he also said there were other programs he was sure that dealt with like language or dealt with different aspects, the biological matter. You have to imagine if you have a craft and that craft has biologicals, that you'd have a whole slew of different types of programs, from language to culture to, I don't know, to everything. You'd have to imagine that.
Yeah, and then let's say you're Bell Labs. Do you want to say, this wasn't our idea, we got the idea from some alien stuff that some colonel from the Army dropped off on our doorstep?
Right.
No, because these patents and technologies that develop from that, or develop, are worth billions and billions of dollars.
And also, if you're given actual materials that our military recovered, and there's like, you can't talk about how we gave these to you what's recovered, but anything you make from it, you can take credit for. Right. So that's a whole thing other than financials. Like, if you want to keep that secrecy in place, just like how that was all built around the atomic programs, then you're going to keep your mouth shut because that was the deal to begin with. Right?
Remember in an earlier show, we talked about the Russians. I know I got a lot of crap about this comment, but I had been told by people that we both know, who were in a position to know, that they suspect that the Russians had developed some kind of a weapon based on their recovered alien technology, their crash retrieval program, reverse engineering, that there's some kind of a laser beam type weapon that they have been dying to employ, which might explain some of the provocative encounters we've had with Russian warplanes. Now, I know that that's a lot to swallow, and I can't prove it conclusively, but that's what we were told by people who have told us other things that we have been able to verify.
Well, we know somebody that worked on a Russian-down craft on a laser program, if we're speaking plainly. And if that's true, that connection between Russia and the United States, where we're both kind of fighting for this technology, I thought it was counterintuitive. But even when Bob Lazar was working out at S4, he talked about this partnership between Russia and the U.S. And he said at some point that ended. At some point there was some revelation that the U.S. had, and they kicked out the Russian counterparts. Now, I thought that was so weird, but when I went and investigated a bunch of people that were looking into cold fusion, the war was called cold fusion. Low nuclear energy reaction is what the old-timers who worked on it, what they would call it. So a lot of these guys were working on that technology before it even had a name. They all talked to me about UFOs as well. And one thing that really struck me after hearing the Lazar story, they would tell me how in their laboratories there was always a phone, and that phone connected directly to Russia and their counterparts in Russia. It's super counterintuitive because some of this is during the Cold War. How would scientists from two rival countries in some kind of global, war basically at the time, how are they communicating on a scientific level? But it turns out it wasn't just true about UFOs. It was true about things like cold fusion. So once I heard that from people that were in those laboratories, back in the day, that made a lot more sense to me that was going on. It's still counterintuitive, but it's just funny. You find that in real...
I was just thinking, we were talking about whether to jump into the Corso topic or not, and I think with reverse engineering, crash saucers being a front burner issue, that maybe folks should revisit this case and look at the book, revisit the interviews that Corso has done. Now that we know that Arrow is really digging into this stuff, I'm sure they'll want to know if Corso was what he claimed and whether he is telling the truth or not, and they'll really get to the bottom of it, right?
Some people, I don't know if they know when you're being sarcastic and you say, Arrow is really digging into this. Yeah, Arrow does not seem to be doing what the public wants him to do, which is transparency on the issue. We have seen recently some drops or some archives from different federal agencies. That's great. But the core of the question remains. Have we been reversed? We know what we believe to be the answer, but is it publicly going to be said that we have been reverse engineering non-human technology?
Hell no, they're not going to say that. I mean, again, I'm a glass half empty guy, and I've been saying for a long time on this program and in other formats that the closer we get to the goodies, the harder the pushback is going to become. We're seeing it right now. It's unfolding right now in D.C. The pushback against Grush and the other whistleblowers, the pushback on Congress, whether or not there are going to be future hearings or not. We hear conflicting stories about that, but it seems like there's some pretty strong statements about and characterizations of Grush, for example, someone who supposedly knows nothing about what they're saying to Congress. We're seeing it in real time, the pushback right now. Heavy-duty lobbying behind the scenes by the aerospace giants and the companies that give out millions of dollars in campaign contributions. It's happening right now.
And we know that there's been a handful of more people that have submitted their statements and their testimony to the Intelligence Community Inspector General. and that has been officially done. They have officially made those. Now, is that going to seep out into the public? Are we going to have that as a public conversation? They're doing an investigation right now. The ICIG is doing an investigation on the claims from these people who, by the way, we've talked with. They've first-hand direct knowledge when it comes to working on these programs. That's what everyone wants to hear. They want to have somebody stand up there in front of Congress, and there will be more hearings come hell or high water. There will be. You know, there's some pit bulls in Congress for us. So here's the deal. Are we going to see somebody sitting there, and saying, I worked on an alien spacecraft? You know, people that are not in the public eye, people that nobody knows their name. Are we going to see that? I think we are.
Well, I hope so. And we know people who are willing to do that.
Right.
But they're having second thoughts right now because of some of the statements that have been made by our leaders. Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick saying, I've seen no credible evidence of ET technology or anything beyond the laws of physics. We know what kind of testimony he's received. We know he's got some very specific information about places, exact buildings where this stuff is stashed. Has he gone there to look for it? Because I don't get the feeling that he has. And I know, we know the effect that that's had on some of these whistleblowers who are standing by, ready to put their lives and careers and reputations on the line by saying what they know about these reverse engineering programs. And they're hearing this from the guy who's in charge of the Arrow program. It's not something that builds a lot of confidence.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge and how I understand it is there are some, I guess you should say, defense contractors that have parts or elements of a craft, certain things that are just separated to look at. But there are other ones, like Lockheed, that allegedly have a full craft from a known craft downing or a known crash retrieval. If that information gets out, there's going to be a lot of eyes on Lockheed. Now, the way this works, and I'm going to go back to a story that I told, I think it was on the Rogan podcast, was there was a guy working on semiconductors or superconductors or something like that. This was in the 70s. All he got was an item that was put in front of him, and it was like, hey, try to work on this, try to tell me. No company he knew was making these like this. It's almost 100% efficient. No markings on it, no nothing. Again, a guy not ready to break from the fold, but I got it all documented, so when I get the thumbs up, that story's coming out. There's a lot of people like that. There's another case that you and I are working on that is not, we haven't talked about yet, but there was an individual who is renowned for reverse engineering in other fields, and there was an object that apparently he saw, and he was taken in. I don't want to give too many details, I'm still looking at this, but he was taken in, and he was shown something for, I think, a couple days, and was unable to be helpful in any way because the propulsion system, the energy source of this, was nothing that in his field he would know about. So you hear this that there are individuals pulled out of nowhere just because they're good at something. Like, I don't know, a guy that makes rocket cars and works at Los Alamos. You know, he's pulled into some weird program for a very short amount of time, just kind of given the overview, set to work on it, and then bam, they're out. Never hear from it again. That's what happened to the superconductor, supercapacitor guys. Like, he never got to hear about it again. So they've got these questions that linger for decades. What did I see? Where is that from? There's not many options.
Well, we know that the Manhattan Project worked with stovepipes. And people were working on little slices of that project and had no idea how it fit into the bigger picture. So that really does happen. It is a way to move forward on some of these exotic technologies. Colonel Corso tells us that that's exactly what happened with multiple technologies that he helped seed into private industry. It'd be nice if there's a fresh new look into some of his allegations.
Right, and I guess if you're, people, we all have to kind of learn how this works, but it's something like top secret. That's great, but there's compartmentalized special access, so even if you have the right clearance, if you are not part of that, they call it a bigot list, I don't know exactly what that word means, but a special list of people that can look into it. And we've heard that people are denied access all the time, even if they're investigating this stuff. So, look, it keeps secrets, and that's probably generated from the atomic program. We wanted to protect this secret at all costs, so that architecture that was put in place during the atomic era, I think, is the same architecture that's hiding the UFO truth to people.
Well, big secrets can be kept. Big secrets are being kept. It's our job to try to expose them.
It is. Thanks, man.
Never have so few
presentation of Jeremy Corbell, George Knapp, Dark Horse Entertainment, and Cadence 13 Studios. Available now for free on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your shows.
Counter UAV online. They're flying. Solid copy. Counter UAV is blocking enemy recon.
July 17, 1962. At the height of the Cold War, both superpowers fight for technological supremacy over air and space. And NASA's engineers man the front lines.
These are the early days of high-speed, high-altitude flights.
Everything is new, everything is on the edge.
In 1955, NASA's forerunner, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, commissions the X-15, a rocket-powered supersonic plane to reach the edge of Earth's atmosphere. The chief test pilot for the X-15 program is Major Robert White. A veteran of 3 wars, White holds the record for the fastest manned flight ever, over 4,000 miles per hour.
Major White and the other X-15 pilots were flying faster and higher than anyone had ever flown before.
First, he hitches a ride to 45,000 feet under the wing of a B-52 mothership. The engines burn for 82 seconds, accelerating White to 3,800 miles per hour. Nearly 60 miles above the Earth, he is higher than any person in recorded history.
He was flying very high, very fast. Suddenly there's something out there.
Power windows, tested for extremes, designed for your home.
We all know the history. How we're supposed to wait for our turn? Maybe they forgot who we are. We learn from the legends. Legends don't wait for permission. Neither do we. This is our dream. And this is our turn.
Chaparral missile system that could knock down anything that was higher. At 22:30 hours on May 23rd, 1974, the ADAC informed the Army Air Defense Unit that an object was tracked on radar flying towards Ramstein Air Base. The object was designated Bogey 1. The Army unit was informed Bogey 1 was flying at 6,000 feet and did not identify itself. The Army unit immediately went to Red Option 1, which meant all air defense systems were activated. After all attempts to identify the bogey failed, the commander authorized the Army unit to shoot down Bogey 1. Both Chaparral and Vulcan systems locked into Bogey 1. However, at 22:47 hours, just a few minutes later, Bogey 1 disappeared from radar. Now this bogey left the radar screen and might have landed just north of Ramstein Air Base. So immediately ADAC notified the Ramstein Air Base command post that this craft left the radar and might have landed. So security forces at Ramstein was notified to search the area for Bogey 1. Now the security force would have been Air Force security, police personnel, combat trained, with heavy weapons and heavy vehicles going out there and trying to locate where this is. Now this is over an hour later. ADAC advised the Army Defense Command that Bogey 1 was flying directly at their location, 16 miles away at 2,900 feet. Now, what happened between that almost 2-hour period of time? We don't know. Now, you can just imagine what the commander of that air defense system thought, how he was going to prepare. I mean, suddenly he's told, here it is, it's coming right at you. Both the Chaparral and the Vulcan system locked onto Bogey 1. The Vulcan fired first at Bogey 1. All Vulcan rounds struck Bogey 1. Bogey 1 continued to fly, at which time the Chaparral missile was activated and fired at the Bogey. Hitting the Bogey, a second Vulcan system fired another 6 rounds. Remember, we're talking about 6,000 rounds of 20 millimeters. Bogey 1 crashed in a field west of Ramstein. It fell in the field some distance away from their defense artillery personnel, and again, west of Ramstein Air Base. In a large field, the closest community would have been the village of Ramstein, which would have been north of where this craft landed. 1:43 a.m., a German police patrol arrived at the crash site. The German police patrol was accompanied by an Air Force security policeman. Bogey 1 was on the ground, but didn't seem to be damaged. The ground around Bogey 1 was on fire, the grass around it. German fire units arrived on scene. Now this presented another problem. These German fire personnel, it wasn't American fire personnel, remember Germans outside Ramstein Air Base, they had no idea what this object was, nor were they ever briefed on what this object was. The object wasn't on fire, the ground around it was on fire. So somehow the crash of this UFO ignited the surrounding grass. Ground assault units of the 32nd arrived on scene. The artillery, the air defense artillery unit, also had an attack force. The area around Bogey 1, the Army Assault Team commander described Bogey 1 as being elliptical in shape, 20 feet in diameter. There were no windows or doors. Bogey 1 did not contain any emblems or other markings. There was a bluish light emitted from the bottom of the craft. Now, if you were the commander, could you just imagine reporting this back to the command post? We got a flying saucer here. What do we do with it?
Basically, diversity is a code word for anti-meritocracy. Diversity is a code word for racial preferences.
I didn't realize you used to be a liberal.
When I started doing journalism in New York, I knew nothing. I saw the poison of big government.
And I'm not making that up. That's actually was recorded on tape of what the commander said. We have a flying saucer here. What are we supposed to do? How do we treat it? Now, this bluish light being emitted from under the aircraft scared a lot of people. Not just that commander of that assault team, but also the fire personnel. They didn't know if this thing was harmful. Was it emitting radiation? Was there some sort of a ray gun being emitted? They were scared. Fearing the craft could be a nuclear weapon. And again, we don't know what this thing is. Did the Soviet Union just send in a nuclear bomb in the form of a flying saucer? Those thoughts were going through a lot of people's minds. From the ground commander on scene, to the ADAX commander, to the commander of the U.S. Air Force in Europe at the command post at Ramstein, to the commander of SHAPE. SHAPE is in Belgium. It's the controlling mechanism for all of the military U.S. military forces and NATO forces in Europe. He's a 4-star general. He's being briefed on this. What do we do? How do we handle this? Well, once the ground commander notified him that could this be a nuclear weapon, the withdrawing distance was increased. The perimeter around it was increased. They immediately then notified the explosive ordnance disposal personnel, or the EOD personnel, the bomb team, so to speak. About 3 hours later, an explosive ordnance disposal team specialists from Misal Army Depot, which was adjacent to Ramstein, arrived. They set up equipment around the UFO. They analyzing equipment to detect radiation, detect whether this could be a nuclear weapon. Assistance came from the Air Force EOD unit at Capone Barracks, which was a few miles away from Ramstein Air Base. Again, they didn't really know what to do with it. They didn't detect, the EOD personnel didn't detect any radiation being emitted from the craft. Now, this blue light was still appearing on the bottom of the craft, and they couldn't determine what that blue light was. Finally, the commander of U.S. Air Force Europe authorized the EOD Army combat units to try to enter the craft. So an assault team made of U.S. Army infantry personnel, and I'm going to say this, and I'll try to explain it later, specially trained to handle these type of incidents. Now, who were these specially trained Army infantry units? Well, it took me a long time to figure that out. But we actually had Special Forces personnel back in those days, Army Special Forces. We didn't have Delta Force until the late 70s. But we had U.S. Army Green Berets. They were Special Forces. We had U.S. Army Rangers. They were also Special Forces. But there was a Special Forces team at a base near Ramstein, Army base near Ramstein, that sent a special team to the area. At 7 o'clock in the morning, an assault team, along with the EOD and the aircraft, or the spacecraft, from the bottom hatch. Now, EOD personnel had to blow open something, use explosives, but ironically, it wasn't difficult to open this. And what they find, what do you think they found? They found 4 non-human bodies. Yes, bodies. These ETs were dead. They searched the interior of the craft, found that there were no other non-humans, and then they exited the craft. At 9 o'clock in the morning, personnel from the U.S. Army 650th Military Intelligence Group and the U.S. Air Force Detachment 7024th Office of Special Investigations agents, that's AFOSI, arrived at the scene and took control. The non-human bodies were placed in body bags and removed from the scene. The craft was transported on a flatbed to Ramstein Air Base and stored in a hangar.
Yeah, I think our culture is the ultimate competitive advantage. I think it's our biggest differentiator. If you think back the last few years, COVID happened. It really reduced the human interaction. And I think we're rebounding out of that. We adjusted and we went with that. That was fine. But I think the world is adjusting back out of that and is craving human interaction and is craving this personal experience with people. And so the fact that we've never changed that as the expectation, even when it was, you know, mostly DoorDash drivers or whoever coming into our store, our baristas continue to have these really personal experiences with whoever it is that they're encountering through the drive-thru window or at the pickup counter, and it is the thing that is going to set us apart. It's the thing already setting us apart, because that's the differentiator. That's what our customers come to us for. That's what our staff wants to work here for. So it's a hiring differentiator, a retention differentiator, and a consumer differentiator.
On May 26th, a C-5 U.S. Air Force cargo aircraft flew the craft and the bodies to Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. The story was featured in several UFO specials in the 1980s. Again, the location was never mentioned. It was just told that a craft was shot down, but again, the location was never mentioned. Now jump ahead to 2010 UFO Convention in Laughlin, Nevada. Robert Dean, Command Sergeant Major of the United States Army, retired, gave a briefing on this incident with more details. But again, the locations were never mentioned. And so jump again to another UFO convention, 2018, which I spoke. In a private meeting involving several UFO insiders, so to speak, the location was told. And actually documented, a FOIA document was received. But again, this FOIA document was heavily redacted, and the exact location was blacked out. So we know this happened. Now, I have to jump back to my time at Area 51. I was at Area 51 twice during the middle 80s. I was a counterintelligence officer there on temporary duty. I was replacing another Air Force agent who had been sick, so I came in to replace him, doing his duties. I read a document then, which was highly classified, which pertained to this incident. I couldn't talk about it before, but now that it's out in the public, I can talk about it. This craft that was brought to Area 51 in the 70s was still there. But now, in 84, when I was in 1984, they were able to actually fly this craft. How they did it, I don't know. I wasn't briefed in research and development or technical or scientific data. I was an intelligence officer. I had access to some of the information, but not all of it. The bodies that were recovered from inside this craft that was shot down near Ramstein Air Base, West Germany in 1974, were still there in a cryogenic chamber. I had the opportunity to see pictures of these two bodies, but I was never able to actually go in and learn anything more about it. So this incident really happened. You can do some Googling. There is a full statement on the record, so to speak, on the internet by the lieutenant who was the commander, speaking about this incident, describing it in his own words, which is certainly more detailed than my 30-minute presentation could give you. But I suggest you go out and read it. Today's presentation is about an incident that happened at McCord Air Force Base, which is located near Tacoma, Washington. This incident happened in 1972. One of my supervisors, who I worked with at Area 51, was the investigating Morse agent for this case. I'm going to talk about a tactical air navigation system, or TACAN. All U.S. Air Force bases maintain TACAN. On October 14, 1972, 2 Air Force TACAN technicians drove to the TACAN facility for routine maintenance. The facility was a dirt road, well maintained by the U.S. Air Force road crews. Upon arrival at the TACAN facility, both technicians opened a gate leading into the TACAN. While inside, both technicians heard a strange sound coming from the outside. One of the technicians went outside to determine the noise that they were hearing. He saw a large flying saucer. When I talk about these incidents, I'm using their words, the witnesses' words, not something that is official. The technician reports and later described this incident and described what he saw as a large flying saucer hovering just above the TACAN building. The technician yelled for his partner to come out and look up. The second technician exited the TACAN building, went outside, looked up, and saw the same thing, which he described as a very large flying saucer. Both technicians observed the saucer-shaped craft land directly in front of the building. Now, directly in front of the building is a clearing. Although this is in a forested area, there's a large clearing inside the fenced area which would have been to the east, or excuse me, to the west of the TACAN building. One of the technicians went back into the building and called the base police. There was a phone located in the building. He called the base police to report this incident. Now, you have to stop and think about this. He picks up a phone. He dials a certain number. They didn't have 911s back then. On the base, it was 555. 555 got you emergency dispatch. An emergency dispatch contained the base police, the fire dispatch, and ambulance dispatch. He told the dispatcher, who answered the phone, that a flying saucer had landed where he was located, and that they needed some help. He also observed 2 entities wearing silver suits, bright gold-colored helmets, exit the craft. Now, he's inside the building with the phone, describing what he's seeing on the outside. He's giving real-time information to the dispatcher at the base police office. Now, obviously, this technician on the phone and the other technician that was standing near the phone were startled by what they were seeing. They were seeing a UFO land, or a flying saucer, and 2 entities, as they call them, exit the craft, and they walked towards the technicians. As the one technician was describing in real time what was happening, he startled. He said, "I'm startled. Hold on a minute." And then he came back just a few seconds later and said, "They're walking into the building." Now, these 2 technicians are close together at the entrance to this building. And there's a regular door leading from the outside into the TACAN building. These 2 entities walked past the 2 technicians into the building. Now, the strange part about this is that the technicians, although one of them was on the phone and the other one was standing in close proximity to his partner, they feared that they would be harmed if they moved. So they never moved, but somehow these 2 entities got through them. They walked through them. They got through them in some way. That's how the 2 technicians described it. They walked by us. There wasn't enough room for anybody to walk past them. It's a regular door. And both technicians were in the doorway. How did these two entities get by them? That puzzled a lot of people. We're going to talk a little bit about the explanation of this later. The entities walked into the building. One of the technicians turned around and watched them. Now the building was about 12 foot by 16 foot. It wasn't a big building. And it also contained racks of electronic equipment. The TACAN equipment was in there, plus the radio equipment was also in there. The radio repeater system was also in this building. So there wasn't a lot of area to move around. The only thing other than that in this building was a small desk with a chair that the technicians could record in their logs of what they did. One chair. One of the technicians watched these two entities move around the building, looking at the equipment, not damaging it, just kind of walking by and viewing it. And then the two entities exited the building and walked to the rear of the TACAN building. They came out and walked around to the back of the building. The two technicians moved into the building and locked the door from the inside. They realized their safest place was inside the building. They could lock it from the inside, and they had a telephone, and they had limited supplies in there to survive. They didn't know how long they would be in there, but they figured they were safe inside the building. It took about 17 minutes for the U.S. Air Force Security Police to arrive on scene. Now there's another confrontation. The two U.S. Air Force Security Police personnel, armed, exited their patrol vehicle and confronted the saucer. It was parked right there. Although the two SPs did not have any contact with the technicians at this point, because remember, the technicians were locked inside the building, they did examine the saucer. Again, the two entities were around. The two policemen couldn't see any entities. They just saw this ramp that's down on the ground and this big saucer sitting on some tripods. So the security police personnel thought they would examine the craft to see maybe these entities were inside. Interviewing them later, one of the senior security police person thought that this might have been some sort of an Air Force craft that was secret. A short time later, the two technicians exited the building and informed the SPs of what happened. And they pointed to the rear of the building, saying that the two entities are back here, behind the building. At this time, a second U.S. Air Force Security Patrol arrived. This time, there was a security policeman with his working dog, or a patrol dog. The patrol dog immediately ran to the rear of the building, ran away from his handler to the rear of the building, and began to bark. The dog handler ran behind the building after his dog. The patrol dog and his handler confronted the two entities. They were standing behind this building. Verbal commands were given by the security policemen, but the commands were not obeyed. It appeared that these two entities couldn't understand anything in English, and they didn't respond in any other language. They were in front of the security policeman, the dog handler with his dog, but they didn't understand what the security policeman's commands were. The entities continued to move towards the saucer. The patrol dog then attacked one of the entities, tearing the sleeve of the entity's uniform or outfit. Unbeknownst to the SPs, another entity exited the craft. Now, no one knew that there was another entity inside the craft. The two SPs that initially responded to the scene did walk up the ramp and look in, but thought maybe this was some kind of experimental Air Force craft and decided not to go any farther. As the entity was attacked, he pointed something at the dog, which caused the dog to immediately run away. Not harming the dog, not shooting the dog with any kind of explosive device or bullet, but it scared the dog. Both entities carried the injured entity back to the craft. So the one that got out of the craft came back to where the other two were. The attack on the one entity seemed to injure him, and he was on the ground. But the other two entities picked him up and carried him back to the craft. One of the SPs pulled out his .38 caliber revolver and fired several rounds at the entities. I don't know if that was such a good idea, but placing yourself in such a situation that you had virtually unknown entities attacking you or being in your presence, I think maybe they considered it a hostile act because they chased the dog away and they didn't know what this device was that one of the entities was carrying. So the one policeman fired the bullet, fired his gun at the one entity. The bullet seemed to stun one of the entities, who then fell to the ground. Now we have two injured entities. Additional SPs and two U.S. Army military policemen from nearby Fort Lewis arrived on scene. They just happened to be in a patrol area, and they heard their call for assistance, and they arrived. Eventually, the entities were able to pull their injured comrades back into the craft. But the craft did not immediately fly away. They remained on the ground. It was surmised that the entities were trying to maybe provide first aid to their injured comrades. The U.S. Air Force Security Police supervisor arrived on scene and ordered the guards to disable the craft in some way. Now, no one knew where this craft came from. No one knew exactly what this craft was made of. Two entities that appeared non-human. So how were they going to disable this craft? They tried a number of things by shooting an M16 rifle into the bottom portion of the craft. Now remember, the bottom portion of the craft was still open. They even tried to fire rounds into that area. Eventually, a beam of light was directed out of the side of the craft, striking one of the Army MPs. He fell to the ground. The other MPs and security policemen quickly moved away from the craft. Now we got an injured soldier. They pulled him away. When they pulled him away and the others retreated some distance, safe distance away, the craft then flew away towards the west. Two F-106 fighter jets from the 318th Fighter Interceptor Squadron on base flew an intercept mission towards the craft that was flying away. However, this UFO or flying saucer was able to outfly the two F-106 jets. Eventually, the AFOSI arrived on scene and began a detailed investigation of the incident. The incident was classified top secret and remained in the OSI files unsolved. Eventually, this incident was moved into a training manual for OSI agents. Now, when the OSI agents arrived on scene, what did they do? They immediately started an investigation. They started to collect evidence. The injured military policeman was transported by ambulance to Madigan Army Hospital, which was just a short distance away. He was examined and found some burns on his left arm and left side near the lower part of his rib cage. Doctors examined these wounds but couldn't determine how they were formed. What happened? What ray gun or as they mentioned, one of the doctors mentioned to us agents, or what kind of maybe laser was pointed at this particular MP to disable him. Speaking with this MP later, he said he was disabled, his whole body felt numb and he fell to the ground. He couldn't move. But it was only short-lived. He said after a few minutes he was able to get back up again. But then he noticed that his uniform was burned. And then he noticed that his skin was burning, both on his left arm and just under his rib cage. The military working dog that was stunned was also examined by veterinarians, military veterinarians, who found these same style burn marks on the dog in 2 different places. What caused that? We never found out. What happened to this craft after it left? It flew west, flew up towards Olympia National Forest in northwestern Washington. The F-106s pursued it. Now, these 106s had Falcon rockets that they could fire to disable this flying saucer. But the flying saucer outflew the F-106s. At the time, in 1972, these F-106s were advanced fighter jets. We didn't have F-16s or F-15s back in those days. These were probably one of the most advanced fighter jets, fighter interceptor jets, that the Air Force had in inventory. They were on alert 24 hours a day, 365 days a year at McCord. And 2 of them always carried nuclear weapons called Gs. So these jets were fast, but they could never catch up to this flying saucer. Some reports say that the flying saucer landed in the ocean off Vancouver Island. This was reported to us. This was contained in the OSI reports. And some reports claimed it gained altitude and flew out into the atmosphere. What was this flying saucer? Where did it come from? And why was it interested in the TACAN facility, the Tactical Air Navigation System, or the radio repeater system for the base? Was it something they had never seen before, or maybe they encountered the TACAN signals and wanted to know where they were originating from? Some of the scientists surmised that happened. That this signal that the TACAN was sending out, they were homing in on it. And they wanted to know where this came from. Why they landed when they did in plain sight of Air Force personnel, we just couldn't figure that out. But it was a strange incident. It happened. Fortunately, nobody was killed. But it's maintained in the annals of UFO history, maintained by the Air Force Office of Special Investigation. On January 22nd, 1985, U.S. intelligence learned of an incident involving the Soviet military and a UFO near an intercontinental ballistic missile site, or abbreviated ICBM site, near the town of Chermenchova in the eastern part of the Soviet Union. U.S. intelligence had a deep cover asset, or agent, working for the Soviet military in the area. Now, an asset is somebody that we send in to do the work for us, or we call them within the intelligence community the agents. The agent isn't the case officer that sends them in. The agent is somebody, probably normally a citizen of that particular country, who's doing the work undercover. According to this agent, a UFO landed near an ICBM site, number 62, in the early morning hours of January 12, 1985. Now, notice those 2 dates. January 22nd is when we learned about it. But the incident happened January 12th, a 10-day span. Well, it takes some time for agents operating deep inside a country to report back to their case officer. And this is a case of that. This agent reported a confrontation occurring between Soviet military units and the UFO occupants. The Soviet soldiers shot one of the occupants of the UFO after the occupant approached the soldier. After the shooting, several other occupants of the craft retrieved the injured occupant and returned to the craft. A beam of light directed against a Soviet military jeep destroyed the jeep, completely vaporizing the vehicle. The Soviet commander in the area ordered his troops to destroy the UFO. Several rounds from a 12.7 millimeter gun was directed at the craft. Now here we have a war or a battle occurring on Earth, inside a communist country, between a military force, earthbound military force, and an alien force. Now you can just imagine what information was being relayed from the scene through systems, through teletype systems or military communication systems, all the way to the Kremlin in Moscow. You know, fortunately, we were able to tap into some of those communications. We had the National Security Agency with spy satellites flying around the Soviet Union, especially in this area. And those satellites didn't just pick up what was on the ground as a photographic intelligence. They were also picking up signal, or SIGINT as we call it, signal intelligence, or ELINT, electronic intelligence. One of the 12.7 millimeter rounds struck the bottom of the craft. The craft glowed a bluish green color. At the time, 4 occupants of the craft exited and were taken into custody by Soviet military troops. The occupants were described as 1 meter in height, weight about 25 kilograms, no hair, 4 fingers, no thumbs, narrow feet, wearing heavy boots. The occupants were wearing tight-fitting silvery suits. No weapons were observed on the occupants, which the Soviet military named Shoshashka, or creatures in English. That's the word for creatures in English in Russian. Now, I've done enough of these presentations, and I'm sure my viewers out there have listened to the description of ETs in the past. This particular description of ETs sounds just like the Greys, exactly like the Greys, with the exception of the boots. But this might be just the interpretation of what these ETs are wearing by the Soviet military. The creatures were transported to Sashalakova, a military barracks near this location, and detained. Once at the barracks, Soviet doctors examined the 4 creatures, including the injured one. The doctors revealed the creature's eyes very oversized compared to the size of their head. The head was pear-shaped, no ears were observed on the creatures. The mouth consisted of just a small slit. 2 small openings were above the mouth and was assumed to be the nostrils. An attempt was made by Soviet intelligence personnel to communicate with the creatures. A number of different languages were used to try to communicate with them. Russian, English, French, German, and even Chinese. However, the creatures could not understand any of these languages. Sign language and other attempts to communicate failed. The occupants sat without making a sound. Now, you can imagine what these creatures were feeling. Maybe we can't because we don't know how they think. But we as humans would be pretty scared. We're in a hostile environment. they're being interrogated by strange-looking creatures themselves. We, the humans, who were wearing guns or weapons. The creature's craft was secured by Soviet military personnel. The craft was described as being 15.5 meters in diameter, 5 meters high. The craft was dark gray colored with no noticeable engines. And it did not have any markings at all, no markings whatsoever on the craft. It did have lights that would come on and off at various locations on the craft, but there wasn't any other markings. U.S. intelligence analyzed the report given by this agent. The agent was a reliable source U.S. intelligence had used for 22 years. So this spy, as I can call him, had been working for United States intelligence for 22 years. So he was a reliable asset to us. We knew the agent was there. He was part of the Soviet military team. Although he wasn't actually at the scene, he was in a supervisory position, and he was located some distance away from this. But he was receiving all the communications that was occurring between the ground forces and the command post. The information provided by the agent is somewhat unbelievable based on the subject matter. However, U.S. intelligence feels the information warrants further investigation. Now remember I talked about collecting ELINT, SIGINT, and voice intercepts before. That information wasn't available to the agents, our assets on the ground at the time, or our team of case officers. That information came later. Ironically, U.S. intelligence did obtain 22 of the 100 photographs taken at the scene. Now we also were able to direct additional assets into this operation. Not necessarily assets to the scene, but assets within the Soviet Union who could verify some of the information through other sources. In 2006, Mikhail Mumbrovich came forward to relay additional information on the incident. He was a KGB agent that investigated this incident at the scene. Now, years later, we have a KGB agent coming forth and saying, I was there. Oh, let me tell you about what happened. So Mikhail told us what happened. According to Mikhail, he was on duty in the area of this event. And this is his story. On the early morning hours of 11 January 1985, a UFO landed at Zermorov, a small village west of Cherachova. The Soviet police from Kayuta was dispatched to the scene. The UFO was on the ground for 1 hour. The UFO took off after the police arrived. The UFO flew southwest to the missile site where the confrontation occurred. Now we see that a day before the original incident happened at Cherachova, this particular, we think, and they think, the KGB thinks it was the same craft, landed some distance away from Cherachova in a small village, Soviet village. The two creatures, including the injured one, were taken to a military barracks at Kursk, not Sashalakova. So now there's some different information that we're receiving from the former KGB agent, differing of what information was given to our asset, or information that our asset gave to us. That's common. There's so much occurring in a particular area at that time. If you have two assets working independently of each other, they may give you different information. The creatures did communicate with one of the young Soviet soldiers through hand signals. The creatures escaped from the barracks where they were being detained, even though they were being guarded by the elite KGB border troops. Now, Within the Soviet Union, back in those days, the KGB controlled the border. And they had elite troops. I guess would be similar to our Rangers or Delta Force Commandos, or even similar to the GSG-9 in West Germany Border Patrol. The creatures escaped. Now remember this. They were guarded, they were in a secure facility, and somehow they disappeared. If you put all this together, you realize that a real incident happened inside the Soviet Union. Maybe this was the Roswell. Actually, this would have been more than just a Roswell incident. This is an actual battle that occurred on the ground inside the Soviet Union between the Soviet military and extraterrestrials. What happened to these extraterrestrials? How did they escape? Or did they just disappear? Did they have the ability to do that? And why hadn't they disappeared prior to this? All these questions we can think about and theorize, but we don't know the answer to. They're gone. But what the Soviets did have, and now the Russians have, is the craft. The craft didn't disappear. The craft is still in hands of the Russian government, probably at Kapustin Yar or some other place, being analyzed, and maybe even reverse engineering. I mean, we did this in the past at Area 51. I'm sure the Russians are doing it today, and they've probably done it in the past. And this is probably not the only craft the Russians obtained. We knew before they had two crafts at Kapustin Yar back in the 80s that they were collected before that. Now, in 1985, they have another craft. It sounds to me like this craft is a lot bigger than the other two crafts they had. So now they have at least three crafts. Anyway, that concludes my presentation regarding the incident at Chernichova. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, I'm Richard Doty. From 1951 to 1978, the United States Air Force operated a series of radar sites throughout the United States, Canada, and Alaska. Benton Air Force Station was one of these defense zone radar sites, located on top of Red Rock Mountain in central Pennsylvania. On March 5, 1965, two Air Force technicians assigned to the 648th Radar Squadron was assigned to repair the radar antenna located near the northeast corner of the radar site. At Red Rock, at the Air Force Station at Benton, there was a height finder radar system which meant it found high-flying objects. They both drove to the antenna. The day was blustery, with high winds and frequent blowing snow. The technicians arrived at the radar antenna and opened the outer door to access the control system for the radar. Just as both technicians were about to enter the building, they observed an object hovering directly above the antenna. It was a disc-shaped object that was just a few hundred feet above their location. In the front of the site, or east of where they were at, west of where they were at, was a softball field. And just adjacent to the softball field was a helicopter port. The sergeant walked inside the radar building and telephoned radar command post. Sergeant reported the incident, but the command post was unaware of any object on radar. Now remember, this is a radar site. So any objects flying near this site would be detected on the site's radar system. But the operator at the command post told these two technicians, "We don't have anything on the radar screen." They became concerned about that. When the sergeant exited the building, he couldn't find the airman, couldn't find his partner. Looked around, couldn't find him. The sergeant observed a disc-shaped object on the ground, just adjacent to the radar building. As the sergeant looked around for the airman, he noticed that the airman was standing next to the craft that was on the ground. The sergeant yelled for the airman to get away from the craft and the airmen returned to hit the sergeant's location. Both technicians were amazed at what they were seeing. This huge disc-shaped object had landed inside a U.S. Air Force radar site in Pennsylvania. There were lights around the middle portion of this flying saucer, as they later called it. Both technicians walked to their maintenance vehicle so they could drive away. They decided discretion is a better part of valor, so to speak. They didn't want to confront it, they didn't know what it was, and they decided to just get away from it. But as they were approaching the vehicle, they were frozen. Neither man could move. Then the two men saw two strange creatures exit the craft. The two creatures were wearing thick, silvery suits, similar to flight suits. The creatures wore helmets with strange tubes on each side. Both men then felt extremely dizzy. The command post sent an air policeman. Back in those days, military policemen within the Air Force was called air policemen, not military policemen. When the air policeman arrived, he couldn't find either technician. Another air policeman arrived and completed a search of the area. They found the truck, they found their tools, but they couldn't find either the sergeant or the airman. They immediately notified the command post. The command post then notified the Pennsylvania State Police of the missing technicians. Then they conducted a search, both inside the radar site by air policemen and by other site personnel, because this site only had 6 military policemen assigned to the site. The search lasted 16 hours. Sometime later, a state trooper patrolling State Route 487 found the two technicians walking south along the road, 5 miles from the main gate of the radar site. The two radar technicians were taken back to the radar site. The two technicians were treated by Air Force medics at the radar station, but then transported to a hospital at the town of Williamsport, Pennsylvania, for advanced treatment. When they got to the hospital in Williamsport, the doctors detected some strange material on their uniforms. They were still wearing their Air Force uniforms for their fatigue jacket, their pants, shirt, and boots. They couldn't detect what that was, but they were afraid that it might be radiation. So they took their outer clothing off, took all their clothing off, placed it in boxes for the Air Force personnel to analyze later. The command post at Benton immediately notified higher authorities. Notified their command post at Stewart Air Force Base, and also notified the Operations Defense Air Sector at Griffiths Air Force Base near Rome, New York. Immediately, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations sent a team of agents to the radar site. OSI agents interviewed the two technicians at Williamsport Hospital. The two men told their story to the agents. They did this 2 different times, separated from each other, meaning one technician was in one hospital room and the other was in the other hospital room. They told their stories to 2 different agents. The stories were exactly the same, but they lost time. They were unconscious. They couldn't tell everything that happened. Everything right up to they got close to the craft, the dizziness started, and then they found themselves walking along a highway north of the site. They didn't know what happened. Examination of the 2 Air Force technicians revealed strange marks on their necks, face, legs, and backs. Both men were dehydrated. Both men were eventually airlifted to an Air Force hospital at Stewart Air Force Base in New York for advanced care. Air Force OSI agents went to Benton Air Force Station, went to the site where this allegedly happened, examined the area, and found 4 pod marks, or 4 marks in the ground, indentations, but in the Air Force OSI report, they identified them as pod marks, as if pods or landing pods had been indented into the soil. Now remember, there was snow on the ground during that time period. The OSI agents arrived about 12 hours later, but there were still indentations in the snow. They analyzed those indentations, and there was some small amount, but there was some radiation detected. Nothing else was found at the scene, nothing inside the building. The tools were analyzed, the tools weren't radioactive. And nothing was wrong with the radar. One of the concerns was maybe somebody came in, a foreign power, an enemy, a hostile force, landed and disabled the radars. But the radars were not disabled. They were operating just fine, functioning normally. So that didn't happen. The men were tested for drugs and alcohol, but none were found in their system. A radiation test showed an above normal level in their hair. The uniforms worn by the technicians, which was taken off at the hospital, contained trace amounts of alpha radiation. Now, there's different types of radiation, alpha being particles, beta being particles, gamma being rays, and then there's X-rays. Alpha is at least deadly because the skin can stop the penetration into a human body. The only way to get into to harm a human is through inhalation or ingestion. But they didn't find any alpha radiation in the technicians. Through further questioning, they revealed that once the two technicians were frozen, the two creatures moved them into a disc-shaped object. Once in the craft, both technicians were placed on examination tables. At this point, the two technicians were able to see the creatures without helmets. These creatures were gray in color, large eyes, no ears, only small openings for mouth. Although the creatures did not speak English, it seemed the two technicians were able to hear voices in their head. Now, let's talk about that a minute. We've heard this